My fear is that if that line breaks, then Bitcoin support is breaking, and likely you're heading to 20,000 on Bitcoin. If Ethereum breaks, it's probably heading to 1,700 or so.
Let's start with Bitcoin. Now, we saw the slew of bullish developments unfold here for the cryptocurrency. I could almost sum it up by saying a splash of capital for the crypto. Goldman Sachs last week became the first major U.S. bank to trade Bitcoin over the counter. Ray Dalio's Bridgewater has also said it's about to make an investment into a crypto fund. So all these positive news items are really helping the crypto here, right, Gareth?
What I'm focusing on here is that if you look at the NASDAQ, right, the NASDAQ has had a huge move to the upside. In fact, I can quickly show the NASDAQ 100 chart. So you've had this big risk on trade coming back ever since the Fed raised 25 basis points. And then crypto is kind of following suit here. So while there's positive developments in crypto, I would say in general, it's behaving just like it should. It's following the tech sector as it did to the downside, or in fact, you could argue that it led to the downside. My major concern here is the chart. The chart to me is actually coming into significant resistance. You can see here it's had multiple up days in a row, about 7 up days in a row. This is the upper range. If you connect this high right here, let me zoom in a little bit there to this high. Notice how that trend line is right above here, and then that's the 200 moving average. So for me, if Bitcoin is really about to break out here, it needs to get over this area. This would be the big area. This is the one you want to follow as a technician. Otherwise, technically you're still stuck in this same sideways channel that we've been in since January. So, it's a great move, but I'm not seeing the meat and potatoes yet, if you will, of the breakout yet. I know there's a lot of bullish sentiment out there. That's a little concerning because everyone's jumping back on the bandwagon. And just like when we were at 68,000, that was the same way it was, and we know what happened. So let's watch and see what happens over the next few days. I would want to see price get above that level and hold there for at least a couple days. Not just peak above where it fools people, but actually hold there. Then we start talking about, all right, now this could be a legitimate break to the upside.
How Bitcoin, you wouldn't be surprised if it were to retest 20,000, quite bearish. Longer term, you've said, look, I'm bullish, but short term bearish. Have the recent events, we spoke before really the black swan event of Russia, Ukraine. So have the recent events changed your perspective on things? Has your stance on Bitcoin's price changed now?
No, it hasn't. And I'll tell you this, is that basically all of these things like Ray Dalio, Goldman Sachs, even the invasion of Ukraine, which pushed oligarchs to arguably move into Bitcoin to avoid sanctions, those are all unbelievably bullish things for the longer term. But what concerns me, number one, is the bear flag that you can see in front of you on the chart, and that tells us that there's likely further downside. And the second thing is, with the Fed raising rates and arguably talking more actively about 50 basis points multiple times this year, you likely will see continued deleveraging in the system. So the NASDAQ, yes, it's had a great bounce. I don't think it lasts. And if the NASDAQ starts to fall and fear comes back in, then you have to say Bitcoin likely will go lower. So again, longer term, those are all positives. In the short term, fear and greed really rule. Right now, you're getting a little bit on the greed side, and ultimately, I think fear takes over and takes us lower. So right here, this is not the point to be getting in. I would much rather give people, like if you hold above this 200 moving average for a couple days, I would feel much safer about getting long at that point. And just in full fair disclosure, I've been shorting, as of yesterday, I've started to inch in on the short side of Bitcoin with my members at verifiedinvestingcrypto.com, and we will likely add again, and we're doing very small amounts, like 2.5% of portfolio, so it's very small at this point, but we're definitely looking for a pullback off the 200 moving average. And then ultimately, I do think it breaks to the downside in the next couple months when the NASDAQ and tech sector starts to reverse down to the downside. So if you're looking for the bull case, you need it to get above the 200 moving average, so 48,250, and it's got to hold there for a couple days to secure itself. Otherwise, you're right into resistance here. You never want to be the person buying right into resistance. At this point, you can't tell me that the flush out we've seen, it hasn't, none of the alts have gone out of existence and there's 15,000 cryptos. You've got to see some sort of flush out in the system. I mean, even in 2017, you had some going to zero. You got to see, there's so many more today. You've got to see more of that. The Fed is tightening. They're telling you that they're going to tighten and they're going to tighten aggressively. That is negative for risk assets. Bitcoin falls into a risk asset right now. Ethereum, this is an amazing orange trend line right here. You can see it held. It's held the whole way. That's the one you worry about if it ever breaks to the downside. As long as we're trading above that line, then you could argue that you're staying in this range. You can see we're right into this little trend line here, and the 200 moving average is right above that. So the same thing applies as what we just discussed on Bitcoin, where you don't want to be buying right into this area. You'd much prefer if it can stay above for a little while. Otherwise, look for a pullback and then buy the pullback. And again, basically this trade setup is a very simple trade setup. Like, let's just say you pull back to this area right here, right around 3,000 would be support. Yep. If you buy there, you have upside back to here, and your downside is here. Now, if you got below this level, this trend line, then you just stop out of the trade. So again, this is a trader's mentality where you understand the levels, support and resistance. As long as you hold support, you can buy and hold. If you break support, you have to be ready to act, because that would be my fear, is that if that line breaks, then Bitcoin support is breaking, and likely you're heading to 20,000 on Bitcoin. If Ethereum breaks, it's probably heading to 1,700 or so. This one right now, there's a couple positives and negatives. Number one, the positive is it's still trading near its all-time highs, just slightly off. So compare it to Bitcoin or compare it to a lot of the other altcoins, it's held up beautifully well. The negative here is that Bitcoin has just gone on a massive run, and Terra Luna hasn't really done anything. So that's a little, I'm like, oh, okay, let me think about this one here. Why isn't it making a big move? Why isn't it taking out the all-time highs up here? And that would be something that would give me a little bit of a pause. So again, short term, there's a little bit of a trend line just here that I'm watching. And again, if we break below, you're probably headed back to that 200 moving average. If you can get above this line, then I think you retest and maybe break out. But certainly in terms of an investor, it concerns me that it's not behaving like the other cryptocurrencies right now. That would give me a little bit of pause to maybe stay on the sidelines. Of all the charts here, I mean, it has had a big run off of this support line, but at least the 200 moving average is all the way up at $150 right now. So it has some distance to go. You're going to have resistance at 120. It needs to get through that. But if it can get through 120, then you really don't have much in terms of resistance until you get up to that 150 level. So it's had an amazing move. I mean, it's gone from $80 or sub 80 all the way back to 110. But in terms of support and resistance, this one still looks reasonable, especially if it can get through 120. So it might have some legs here. BNB here is, I still think there's more upside on BNB. You are right into this little resistance area, which I would consider to be minor resistance right here from this previous pivot. But this is likely where the chart wants to go. So you see the 200 moving average is around 475. This blue trend line, which would be a retrace to this upsloping line, is right underneath 500. So that's your short-term target on BNB. And again, that means that you probably have another $50 upside in BNB before it runs into major resistance. So the chart's not too bad on this one. It is a little more extended than I like. But again, if you're still kind of in this trade and you're kind of holding, maybe keep a trailing stop on it and then let it run maybe up to that 475, 480 level. So I think at this point, the cryptos have made this massive run. It would be helpful to see consolidation at this point, and then maybe you get another leg up. But watch that Bitcoin chart. The Bitcoin chart remains the one that's going to basically the dog that's wagging its tail, right? And this is the line to watch. So for me, I'm only looking at shorts until we get a pullback, or unless Bitcoin establishes itself above this level.